Make sure to subscribe our channel and press the bell icon to get notified about our future videos. You may pause the video at times to read the questions or the answers at your own pace. Question 1. You are implementing an application that queries a table named purchase in an Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool. The application must show data only for the currently signed in user. You use row level security, implement a security policy, and implement a function that uses a filter predicate. Users in the marketing department report that they cannot see their data. What should you do to ensure that the marketing department users can see their data? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Grant the select permission on the function to the marketing users. B. Grant the select permission on the purchase table to the marketing users. C. Implement a blocking predicate. Or D. Rebuild the function with schema binding equals off. The correct option is B. Grant the select permission to the purchase table to the marketing users. The select permission on the purchase table is needed to query the table. Question 2. You have an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 account. You grant developers read and write permissions by using ACLs to the files in the path/root/input/cleaned. The developers report that they cannot open the files. How should you modify the permissions to ensure that the developers can open the files? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Add contributor permission to the developers. B. Add execute permissions to the files. C. Grant execute permissions to all folders. Or D. Grant execute permissions to the root folder only. The correct option is C. Grant execute permissions to all folders. If you are granting permissions by using only ACLs, then to grant a security principal read or write access to a file, you will need to grant the security principal execute permissions to the root folder of the container and to each folder in the hierarchy of folders that lead to the file. Adding contributor permissions to the developers will not help, as this type of permission does not provide access to the data. Question 3. You use Azure Data Factory to connect to a notebook that runs in an Azure Databricks cluster. The connection is set to use access tokens. You need to revoke a user's token. What should you use? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Access control. B. Conditional access. C. The admin console. Or D. Token Management API 2.0. The correct option is D. Token Management API 2.0. To revoke a user's token, you need to use Token Management API 2.0. The admin console is not able to revoke a user's token. Conditional access restricts access to the Databricks application. IAM provides permission by using Microsoft Entra ID to prevent users from revoking tokens. Question 4. Hotspot. You plan to create an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 account. You need to recommend a storage solution that meets the following requirements: provides the highest degree of data resiliency, ensures that content remains available for writes if a primary data center fails. What should you include in the recommendation? To answer, select the appropriate option in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, replication mechanism. Our options are change field, zone redundant storage, read access geo redundant storage, read access geo zone redundant storage. The correct option is zone redundant storage. To the next statement, failover process. Our options are failover initiated by Microsoft, failover manually initiated by the customer, or failover automatically initiated by an Azure automation job. The correct option is failover manually initiated by the customer. Question 5. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure Blob Storage account named Storage 1 and an Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool named pool 1. You need to store data in storage 1. The data will be read by pool 1. The solution must meet the following requirements. Enable pool 1 to skip columns and rows that are unnecessary in a query. Automatically create column statistics. Minimize the size of files. Which type of file should you use? Our options are A. JSON, B. Parquet, C. Avro, or D. CSV. The correct option is B. Parquet. Automatic creation of statistics is turned on for Parquet files. For CSV files, you need to create statistics manually. Until automatic creation of CSV files, statistics is supported. Question 6. You have an Azure Synapse Analytics Apache Spark pool named Pool 1. You plan to load JSON files from an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 container into the tables in Pool 1. The structure and data types vary by file. You need to load the files into the tables. The solution must maintain the source data types. What should you do? Our options are A. Use a conditional split transformation in Azure Synapse data flow. B. Use a get metadata activity in Azure Data Factory. C. Load the data by using the openRowSet transact-SQL command in an Azure Synapse Analytics serverless SQL pool. Or D. Load the data by using PySpark. The correct option is D. Load the data by using PySpark. It's about Apache Spark pool, not serverless SQL pool. Question 7. You have an Azure Databricks workspace named Workspace 1 in the standard pricing tier. Workspace 1 contains an all-purpose cluster named Cluster 1. You need to reduce the time it takes for Cluster 1 to start and scale up. The solution must minimize cost. What should you do first? Our options are A. Configure a global init script for Workspace 1. B. Create a cluster policy in Workspace 1. C. Upgrade Workspace 1 to the premium pricing tier. Or D. Create a pool in Workspace 1. The correct option is D. Create a pool in Workspace 1. You can use Databricks pools to speed up your data pipelines and scale clusters quickly. Databricks pools a managed cache of virtual machine instances that enables cluster to start and scale 4 times faster. Question 8. You have an Azure subscription that contains the following resources: an Azure Synapse Analytics workspace named Workspace 1, a virtual network named VNet1 that has 2 subnets named SN1 and SN2, 5 virtual machines that are connected to SN1. You need to ensure that the virtual machines can connect to Workspace 1. The solution must prevent traffic from the virtual machines to Workspace 1 from traversing the public internet. What should you create? Select only one answer. Our options are A. A private endpoint from Azure Synapse Analytics in SN1. B. A private endpoint from Azure Synapse Analytics in SN2. C. A service endpoint from Azure Synapse Analytics in SN1. Or D. A service endpoint from Azure Synapse Analytics in SN2. The correct option is B. A private endpoint from Azure Synapse Analytics in SN2. Private endpoints are created in a subnet that does not contain virtual machines. As S1 already contains virtual machines, the private endpoint cannot be created in that subnet and must be created in SN2. Service endpoints are unavailable for Azure Synapse Analytics. Question 9. You have an Azure Synapse Analytics workspace. You need to configure the diagnostic settings for pipeline runs. You must retain the data for auditing purposes indefinitely and minimize costs associated with retaining the data. Which destination should you use? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Archive to a storage account. B. Send to a log analytics workspace. C. Send to a partner solution. Or D. Stream to an Azure Event Hub. The correct option is A. Archive to a storage account. You should choose to archive to a storage account as it is useful for audit, static analysis, or backup. Compared to using Azure Monitor Logs or Log Analytics Workspace, this storage is less expensive and logs can be kept there indefinitely. Question 10. You monitor an Azure Stream Analytics job and discover that the backlogged input events metrics show non-zero values for the last few hours. What should you do to improve job performance without changing the query? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Increase the number of the streaming units. B. Increase the settings for late events. C. Move the job to the dedicated stream analytics cluster. Or D. Repartition the input stream. The correct option is A. Increase the number of streaming units. You should increase the number of SUs as this adds more computational power to the job. Question 11. You have files and folders in Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 for an Azure Synapse workspace as shown in the following exhibit. You create an external table named ext table that has location equals /top folder /. When you query ext table by using an Azure Synapse Analytics serverless SQL pool, which files are returned? Our options are A. file2.csv and file3.csv only. B. file1.csv and file4.csv only. C. file1.csv, file2.csv, file3.csv and file4.csv. Or D. file1.csv only. The correct option is B. file1.csv and file4.csv only. In case of a serverless pool, a wildcard should be added to the location. Question 12. You are designing the folder structure for an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 container. Users will query data by using a variety of services including Azure Databricks and Azure Synapse Analytics serverless SQL pools. The data will be secured by subject area. Most queries will include data from the current year or current month. Which folder structure should you recommend to support fast queries and simplified folder security? The correct option is D /subject area /data source /years /month /date /file data _years _month _date .csv. There is an important reason to put the date at the end of the directory structure. If you want to lock down certain regions or subject matters to users or groups, then you can easily do so with the POSIX permissions. Otherwise, if there was a need to restrict a certain security group to viewing just the UK data or certain planes, with the date structure in front, a separate permission would be required for numerous directories under every hour directory. Additionally, having the data structure in front would exponentially increase the number of directories as time went on. Note, in IoT workloads, there can be a great delay of data being landed in the data store that spans across numerous products, devices, organizations, and customers. It is important to pre-plan the directory layout for organization, security, and efficient processing of the data for downstream consumers. A general template to consider might be the following layout. Question 13. Hotspot. You are planning the deployment of Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. You have the following two reports that will access the data lake. Report 1 reads 3 columns from a file that contains 50 columns. Report 2 queries a single record based on a timestamp. You need to recommend in which format to store the data in the data lake to support the reports. The solution must minimize read times. What should you recommend for each report? To answer, select the appropriate option in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, our options are Avro, CSV, Parquet, TSV. The correct option is Parquet. To the next statement, report 2. Our options are Avro, CSV, Parquet, TSV. The correct option is Avro. Question 14. Hotspot. You need to output files from Azure Data Factory. Which file format should you use for each type of output. To answer, select the appropriate option in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, columnar format. Our options are Avro, gzip, parquet, txt. The correct option is parquet. To the next statement, JSON with a timestamp. Our options are Avro, gzip, parquet, txt. The correct option is Avro. About box 1, Parquet stores data in columns while Avro stores data in a row-based format. By their very nature, column-oriented data stores are optimized for read-heavy analytical workloads, while row-based databases are best for write-heavy transactional workloads. About box 2, an Avro schema is created using JSON format. Avro supports timestamps. Azure Data Factory supports the following file formats. Question 15. Hotspot. You use Azure Data Factory to prepare data to be queried by Azure Synapse Analytics serverless SQL pools. Files are initially ingested into an Azure Data Lake storage Gen 2 account as 10 small JSON files. Each file contains the same data attributes and data from a subsidiary of your company. You need to move the files to a different folder and transform the data to meet the following requirements. Provide the fastest possible query times. Automatically infer the schema from the underlying files. How should you configure the data factory copy activity? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, copy behavior. Our options are flatten hierarchy, merge files, preserve hierarchy. The correct option is merge files. To the next statement, sync file type. Our options are CSV, JSON, Parquet, txt. The correct option is Parquet. Question 16. You need to design an Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool that meets the following requirements. Can return an employee record from a given point in time, maintains the latest employee information, minimizes query complexity. How should you model the employee data? Our options are A as a temporal table, B as a SQL graph table, C as a degenerate dimension table, or D as a type 2 slowly changing dimension table. The correct option is D as a type 2 slowly changing dimension table. A type 2 SCD supports versioning of dimension members. Often, the source system doesn't store versions, so the data warehouse load process detects and manages changes in a dimension table. In this case, the dimension table must use a surrogate key to provide a unique reference to a version of the dimension member. It also includes columns that define the data range, validity of the version, and possibly a flag column to easily filter by current dimension members. Question 17. Hotspot. You have two Azure storage accounts named Storage 1 and Storage 2. Each account holds one container and has the hierarchical namespace enabled. The system has files that contain data stored in the Apache Parquet format. You need to copy folders and files from Storage 1 to Storage 2 by using a data factory copy activity. The solution must meet the following requirements. No transformations must be performed. The original folder structure must be retained. Minimize time required to perform the copy activity. How should you configure the copy activity? To answer, select the appropriate option in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, source dataset type. Our options are binary, Parquet, delimited text. The correct option is binary. To the next statement, copy activity copy behavior. Our options are flatten hierarchy, merge files, preserve hierarchy. The correct option is preserve hierarchy. About binary, copy files as in the fastest way. About preserve hierarchy, it is for saving folder structure. Question 18. You have an Azure Data Factory named ADF1. You need to ensure that you can analyze pipeline runtimes for ADF1 for the last 90 days. What should you use? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Azure Data Factory, B. Azure Monitor, C. Azure Stream Analytics, or D. Azure App Insights. The correct option is B. Azure Monitor. Data Factory only stores pipeline runtimes for 25 days. To view the data for a longer period, that data must be sent to Azure Monitor, where the information can then be retrieved and viewed. Question 19. You have an Azure Synapse Analytics pipeline connected to an Azure SQL database. You need to use data masking to obfuscate data and limit its exposure in lower level environments. Which three options can be used for dynamic data masking? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Select all answers that apply. Our options are A. Always encrypted, B. Custom string, C. Default, D. Number, or E. Row level security. The correct options are B, C, and D, that is custom string, default, and number. Default, number, and custom string are valid options to implement dynamic data masking at the SQL Server database layer. Row-level security is an access restriction capability, not a data obfuscation capability. Always encrypted is not a data masking solution. It implements encryption at the database layer and requires a driver installed on client computers. Question 20. You have a job that aggregates data over a 5-second tumbling window. You are monitoring the job and notice that the SU percent utilization metric is more than 80% and the backlogged input events metric shows values greater than 0. What should you do to resolve the performance issue? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Change the compatibility level, B. Change the tumbling window to a snapshot window, C. Create a user-defined aggregate to perform the aggregation, or D. Increase the number of streaming units. The correct option is D. Increase the number of streaming units. You should increase the number of SUs because the job is running out of resources. When the backlogged input events metric is greater than 0, the job is not able to process all incoming events. Question 21. You have an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 container that contains 100 TB of data. You need to ensure that the data in the container is available for read workloads in a secondary region if an outage occurs in the primary region. The solution must minimize costs. Which type of data redundancy should you use? Our options are A. Geo redundant storage, B. Read access geo redundant storage, C. Zone redundant storage, or D. Locally redundant storage. The correct option is A. Geo redundant storage. While it is true that the customer or Microsoft has to initiate the failover, this is not elaborated in any sense in the question. What is the point of GRS if you cannot read from it after a failover? It provides the service needed at the lowest cost. This would be different if there were keywords like quote-unquote available immediately without downtime or quote-unquote automatically. But there are none. So well, if a region fails, you fail over and read from a secondary region. Bottom line, A. GRS. Question 22. You have an enterprise-wide Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 account. The data lake is accessible only through an Azure virtual network named VNet1. You are building a SQL pool in Azure Synapse that will use data from the data lake. Your company has a sales team. All the members of the sales team are in an Azure Active Directory group named Sales. PO6 controls are used to assign the sales group access to the files in the data lake. You plan to load data to the SQL pool every hour. You need to ensure that the SQL pool can load the sales data from the data lake. Which three actions should you perform? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Note, each area selection is worth 1 point. The correct options are A, B, and F. That is, add the managed identity to the sales group, use the managed identity as the credentials for the data load process, and create a managed identity. The managed identity grants permissions to the dedicated SQL pools in the workspace. Note, managed identity for Azure resources is a feature of Azure Active Directory. The feature provides Azure services with an automatically managed identity in Azure AD. Question 23. You plan to implement an Azure Data Lake Gen 2 storage account. You need to ensure that the data lake will remain available if a data center fails in the primary Azure region. The solution must minimize costs. Which type of replication should you use for the storage account? Our options are A. Geo-redundant storage, B. Geo-zone redundant storage, C. Locally redundant storage, or D. Zone redundant storage. The correct option is D. Zone redundant storage. Zone redundant storage copies the data synchronously across 3 Azure availability zones in the primary region. Question 24. You plan to implement an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 container that will contain CSV files. The size of the files will vary based on the number of events that occur per hour. File sizes range from 4 KB to 5 GB. You need to ensure that the files stored in the container are optimized for batch processing. What should you do? Our options are A. Convert the files to JSON, B. Convert the files to Avro, C. Compress the files, or D. Merge the files. The correct option is D. Merge the files. If you store your data as many small files, this can negatively affect performance. In general, organize your data into larger sized files for better performance. Question 25. You have an Azure Synapse Analytics workspace named WS1 that contains an Apache Spark pool named Pool 1. You plan to create a database named DB1 in Pool 1. You need to ensure that when tables are created in DB1, the tables are available automatically as external tables to the built-in serverless SQL pool. Which format should you use for the tables in DB1? Our options are A. CSV, B. ORC, C. JSON, or D. Parquet. The correct options are A and D, that is CSV and Parquet. Both A and D are correct. For each Spark external table based on Parquet or CSV and located in Azure storage, an external table is created in a serverless SQL pool database. As such, you can shut down your Spark pools and still query Spark external tables from serverless SQL pool. Question 26. You plan to ingest streaming social media data by using Azure Stream Analytics. The data will be stored in files in Azure Data Lake storage and then consumed by using Azure Databricks and Polybase in Azure Synapse Analytics. You need to recommend a Stream Analytics data output format to ensure that the queries from Databricks and Polybase against the files encounter the fewest possible errors. The solution must ensure that the files can be queried quickly and that the data type information is retained. What should you recommend? Our options are A. JSON, B. Parquet, C. CSV, or D. Avro. The correct option is B. Parquet. Need Parquet to support both Databricks and Polybase. Question 27. You have an Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool named Pool 1. Pool 1 contains a partition fact table named dbo.sales and a staging table named stg.sales that has the matching table and partitioned definitions. You need to overwrite the content of the first partition in dbo.sales with the content of the same partition in stg.sales. The solution must minimize load times. What should you do? Our options are A. Insert the data from stg.sales into dbo.sales. B. Switch the first partition from dbo.sales to stg.sales. C. Switch the first partition from stg.sales to dbo.sales. Or D. update dbo.sales from stg.sales. The correct answer is C. Switch the first partition from stg.sales to dbo.sales. Target partition should be empty and answer is not obvious. In default way, data comes to stg and dbo partition is empty or you clean it. After that, switching from source to target. Question 28. You are designing a partition strategy for a fact table in an Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool. The table has the following specifications. Contain sales data for 20,000 products. Use hash distribution on a column named product ID. Contain 2.4 billion records for the years 2019 and 2020. Which number of partition ranges provides optimal compression and performance for the clustered column store index? Our options are A40, B240, C400 or D2400. The correct option is A40. Each partition should have around 1 million records. Dedicated SQL pools already have 60 partitions. We have the formula records by partitions into 60 equals 1 million. Partitions equals record by 1 million into 60. Partitions equals 2.4 into 1 million by 1 million into 60, which equals 40. Note, having too many partitions can reduce the effectiveness of clustered column store indexes if each partition has fewer than 1 million rows. Dedicated SQL pools automatically partition your data into 60 databases. So if you create a table with 100 partitions, the result will be 6,000 partitions. Question 29. You are designing a financial transactions table in an Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool. The table will have a clustered column store index and will include the following columns. Transaction type, 40 million rows per transaction type. Customer segment, 4 million per customer segment. Transaction month, 65 million rows per month. Account type, 500 million per account type. You have the following query requirements. Analyst will most commonly analyze transactions for a given month. Transactions analysis will typically summarize transactions by transaction type, customer segment, and or account type. You need to recommend a partition strategy for the table to minimize query times. On which column should you recommend partitioning the table? Our options are A. Customer segment, B. Account type, C. Transaction type, or D. Transaction month. The correct option is D. Transaction month. For optimal compression and performance of clustered column store tables, a minimum of 1 million rows per distribution and partition is needed. Before partitions are created, dedicated SQL pool already divides each table into 60 distributed databases. Example, any partitioning added to a table is in addition to the distributions created behind the scenes. Using this example, if the sales fact table contained 36 monthly partitions and given that a dedicated SQL pool has 60 distributions, then the sales fact table should contain 60 million rows per month or 2.1 million rows when all months are populated. If a table contains fewer than the recommended minimum number of rows per partition, consider using fewer partitions in order to increase the number of rows per partition. Question 30. You are implementing a batch dataset in the Parquet format. Data files will be produced by using Azure Data Factory and stored in Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. The files will be consumed by an Azure Synapse Analytics serverless SQL pool. You need to minimize storage costs for the solution. What should you do? Our options are A. Use snappy compression for the files. B. Use OpenRowSet to query the Parquet files. C. Create an external table that contains a subset of columns from the Parquet files. Or D. Store all data as string in the Parquet files. The correct option is A. Use snappy compression for the files. Consider the compression codec to use when writing to Parquet files. When reading from Parquet files, data factories automatically determine the compression codec based on the file metadata. Supported types are none, gzip, snappy, and ISO. Also, you must consider the question is asking for storage cost and not operational cost. Question 31. You are designing a data mart for the human resources department at your company. The data mart will contain employee information and employee transactions. From a source system, you have a flat extract that has the following fields: employee ID, first name, last name, recipient, gross amount, transaction ID, government ID, net amount paid, and transaction date. You need to design a star schema data model in an Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool for the data mart. Which two tables should you create? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. Our options are a dimension table for transaction, B, a dimension table for employee transaction, C, a dimension table for employee, D, a fact table for employee, or E, a fact table for transaction. The correct options are C and E, that is a dimension table for employee and a fact table for transaction. About C, dimension tables contain attribute data that might change but usually changes infrequently. For example, a customer's name and address are stored in a dimension table and updated only when the customer's profile changes. To minimize the size of a large fact table, the customer's name and address don't need to be in every row of a fact table. Instead, the fact table and the dimension table can share a customer ID. A query can join the two tables to associate a customer's profile and transactions. About E, fact tables contain quantitative data that are commonly generated in a transactional system and then loaded into the dedicated SQL pool. For example, a retail business generates sales transactions every day and then loads the data into a dedicated SQL pool fact table for analysis. Question 32. You are designing a dimension table for a data warehouse. The table will track the value of the dimensional attributes over time and preserve the history of the data by adding new rows as the data changes. Which type of slowly changing dimension should you use? Our options are A type 0, B type 1, C type 2, or D type 3. The correct option is C type 2. A type 2 SCD supports versioning of dimension members. Often, the source system doesn't store versions, so the data warehouse load process detects and manages changes in a dimension table. In this case, the dimension table must use a surrogate key to provide a unique reference to a version of the dimension member. It also includes columns that define the data range validity of the version and possibly a flag column to easily filter by current dimension members. Question 33. Drag drop. You have data stored in thousands of CSV files in Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. Each file has a header row followed by a properly formatted carriage return and line feed. You are implementing a pattern that batch loads the files daily into a dedicated SQL pool in Azure Synapse Analytics by using Polybase. You need to skip the header row when you import the files into the data warehouse. Before building the loading pattern, you need to prepare the required database objects in Azure Synapse Analytics. Which three actions should you perform in sequence? To answer, move the appropriate actions from the list of actions to the answer area and arrange them in the correct order. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. The actions provided to us are: create a database scoped credential that uses Azure Active Directory application and a service principal key, create an external data source that uses the ABFS location, use create external table as select and configure the reject options, and configure the reject options to specify reject values or percentages, create an external file format and set the first underscore row option. The correct options in the right sequence for these questions are: create a database scoped credential that uses Azure Active Directory application and a service principal key. Create an external data source that uses the ABFS location. Create an external file format and set the first underscore row option. Use create external table as select and configure the reject options to specify reject values or percentages. Question 34. Drag drop. You need to build a solution to ensure that users can query specific files in an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 account from an Azure Synapse Analytics serverless SQL pool. Which 3 actions should you perform in sequence? To answer, move the appropriate actions from the list of actions to the answer area and arrange them in the correct order. The actions provided to us are: create an external file format object, create an external data source, create a query that uses create table as select, create a table, create an external table. The correct options in the right order are: create an external data source, create an external file format object, create an external table. Question 35. Hotspot. You have an Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool named Pool1 and an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 account named Account1. You plan to access the files in Account1 by using an external table. You need to create a data source in Pool1 that you can reference when you create the external table. How should you complete the transact-SQL statement? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, create external data source source1 with bracket on location equals https :/account1 dot. Our options are blob, dfs, table. The correct option is dfs.core.windows.net. Our options are pushdown equals on, type equals blob storage, type equals Hadoop. The correct option is type equals Hadoop. Question 36. Hotspot. You have an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 service. You need to design a data archiving solution that meets the following requirements. Data that is older than 5 years is accessed infrequently but must be available within 1 second when requested. Data that is older than 7 years is not accessed. Costs must be minimized while maintaining the required availability. How should you manage the data? To answer, select the appropriate option in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, data over 5 years old. Our options are delete the blob, move to archive storage, move to cool storage, move to hot storage. The correct option is delete the blob. To the next statement, data over 7 years old. Our options are delete the blob, move to archive storage, move to cool storage, move to hot storage. The correct option is move to archive storage. About box 2, deleting data older than 7 years is not an option available in the answer list. Be careful of the gotcha. Delete the blob is an option, but it would delete all the data, included the ones that are example 5 years old. So you can't choose that answer. So the next best thing to do is to put it into archive. Question 37. Hotspot. You have an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 container. Data is ingested into the container and then transformed by a data integration application. The data is not modified after that. Users can read files in the container but cannot modify the files. You need to design a data archiving solution that meets the following requirements. New data is accessed frequently and must be available as quickly as possible. Data that is older than 5 years is accessed infrequently but must be available within 1 second when requested. Data that is older than 7 years is not accessed. After 7 years, the data must be persisted at the lowest cost possible. Costs must be minimized while maintaining the required availability. How should you manage the data? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, 5-year-old data. Our options are delete the blob, move to archive storage, move to cool storage, move to hot storage. The correct option is move to cool storage. To the next statement, 7-year-old data. Our options are delete the blob, move to archive storage, move to cool storage, or move to hot storage. The correct option is move to archive storage. About box 2, archive optimized for storing data that is rarely accessed and stored for at least 180 days with flexible latency requirements on the order of hours. Question 38. Hotspot. You have a SQL pool in Azure Synapse. You plan to load data from Azure Blob Storage to a staging table. Approximately 1 million rows of data will be loaded daily. The table will be truncated before each daily load. You need to create the staging table. The solution must minimize how long it takes to load the data to the staging table. How should you configure the table? To answer, select the appropriate option in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, distribution. Our options are hash, replicated, round robin. The correct option is round robin. To the next statement, indexing. Our options are clustered, clustered column store, heap. The correct option is heap. To the next statement, partitioning. Our options are date, none. The correct option is none. Question 39. You plan to deploy an app that will distribute files across multiple Azure storage accounts. You need to recommend a partitioning strategy that meets the following requirements. Optimizes the data distribution balance, minimizes the creation of extra tables. What should you recommend? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Hash, B. Lookup, C. Range. The correct option is A. Hash. Lookup partitioning requires a lookup table to identify which partition data should reside in. Range partitioning does not provide optimization for balancing. Hash partitioning is optimized for data distribution and uses a hash function to eliminate the need for a lookup table. Question 40. You have an Azure Synapse Analytics database named DP-1. You need to import data into DP-1. The solution must minimize Azure Data Lake storage transaction costs. Which design pattern should you use? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Store the data in 500 MB files. B. Store the data in 2000 byte files. C. Use a read access geo-redundant storage account. D. Use the Avro file format. Or E. Use the ORC file format. The correct option is C. Use a read access geo-redundant storage account. By using larger files when importing data, transaction cost can be reduced. This is because the reading of files is billed with a 4 MB operation even if the file is less than 4 MB. To reduce costs, the entire 4 MB